let's jump right into this. We're looking at a text from 7th century Arabia, right? Well, in this explainer, we are going to unravel the absolutely staggering 1400-year history of how the Qur'an crossed global linguistic boundaries. It's an incredible story full of traveling monks, curious kings, deeply dedicated scholars, and eventually massive printing complexes. To make sense of it all, we'll follow this journey through 4 distinct stages. The earliest known translations, its crossing into Europe, the very first Chinese version, and finally, the modern translation era. So the big question we're tackling today is this: how exactly did a 7th century Arabic text actually manage to reach the entire globe? We're going to explore this monumental shift, going from these really passionate individual historical translations all the way to the highly regulated global endeavors we see today.
Okay, part 1, the earliest known translations.
The desire to translate this text didn't take long to surface at all. It began almost immediately after its origin, sparking some really pivotal milestones, starting from the 7th century and stretching all the way through the late 9th century. Now, these earliest efforts were highly localized. Way back in the 7th century, Salman the Persian took the initiative to translate just a single chapter, literally just the very first chapter, Al-Fatiha, into his native Persian. So a small but incredibly significant first step. But here's where it gets interesting. You might assume the first complete translation was into a neighboring language, right? Actually, no. Surprisingly, the first confirmed complete translation was into Greek. A scholar named Nicetas Bisbontius used this version over in Constantinople between 855 and 870. And while we don't really know its initial purpose anymore, its mere existence is a massive intellectual milestone. Just a few years later, in 884, the text reached the Sindh region in present-day Pakistan. And this is an amazing moment of cross-cultural exchange. This translation was actually commissioned by an anonymous Kashmiri Hindu king. He basically sent a letter asking for a scholar to explain Islamic Sharia to him. It's just a fascinating example of bridging the intellectual gap between different cultures.
Let's move right along to part 2, crossing into Europe during the Middle Ages.
As the centuries rolled by, major European translations started arriving in rapid succession. Robert of Ketton produced a Latin version in 1143. Fast forward to the 17th century, and we see André du Riet's French translation drop in 1647, which was followed almost immediately by Alexander Ross's English translation in 1649. But wait, there is a massive catch here. Alexander Ross's 1649 English version, which was the very first in the English language, wasn't translated from Arabic at all. No way! He actually translated it directly from André du Riet's French version that had just been published 2 years prior. It's like a classic, high-stakes game of historical telephone, where, as you can imagine, nuances can so easily get lost in translation. Which brings us to part 3, the first Chinese version and the incredible work of one specific man. I really want you to consider the sheer incredible life of Sheikh Elias Wang Jingjai. Born in Xinjiang in 1880, he didn't just study locally. He traveled all over the place. He studied in Egypt, he visited Mecca, and he traveled through Turkey before finally heading back to China in 1924 to begin his life's real work.
And get this number. When he returned from those extensive travels across the Middle East, he hauled back exactly 600 books with him. These physical texts became the essential foundational bedrock for a massive solo translation mission.
The sheer dedication of this guy is absolutely staggering. He spent 40 years of his life translating these various texts into Chinese. On top of that, he even compiled an Arabic to Chinese dictionary. And get this, that dictionary remained the absolute only reference work in its field for 30 solid years. But his absolute magnum opus was translating the entire Qur'an. It took Wang Jingjai 2 whole decades of isolated, painstaking effort to finish the very first complete Chinese translation. It was finally printed in Beijing in 1932. Just think about that. A singular, lifelong pursuit. Finally, that leads us right into part 4, the modern translation era and institutional printing. We have officially moved away from the solitary struggle of scholars like Wang Jingjai, poring over texts completely alone for 20 years, and we've stepped into an era of sheer industrial output. Today, massive institutions like the King Fahd Complex have churned out more than 50 newly prepared translations just since 1984. That is a fundamental shift in how the texts you might read today are processed, verified, and shared. So let's look at this complex. Established in Saudi Arabia in 1984, the King Fahd complex for the printing of the Qur'an was created specifically to mass produce and revise these translations. Unlike those independent scholars of the past we talked about, this complex operates with incredibly strict regulations and very exact requirements for both the content and the format. And because of its massive scale and that rigorous standardization, this modern institution has successfully positioned itself as the definitive gold standard across the Muslim world today. It heavily influences both Salafi readers and a really broad range of Sunni audiences globally. It has literally transformed the entire translation landscape. So as modern institutions standardize this 1,400-year effort, bringing this massive industrial scale to what used to be a lifelong solitary pursuit, we're left with a pretty profound question. How will the monumental challenge of translating historical texts continue to evolve in our modern, hyper-connected world?